Sarah. I'm from Craft. This is meant to just be a casual and informative conversation about all things cloud marketplace. And so we have a number of companies and founders who often ask about this area and whether or not it makes sense to pursue. And so I asked Jon to come here today and teach us a little bit about the world of cloud marketplaces, and he'll tell you about his company and how that helps. And then also we have Vanta, who is conveniently also a craft portfolio company and sells on cloud marketplaces. So we thought this would be a good conversation to help teach you all about this world. I'm recording it because we have a couple of people who RSVP'd who can't make it. So we will be recording and sharing this. And I think probably the best thing, Jon, is just to let you give an introduction to yourself and Sugar, and then we'll go to you, Jessica, and then we'll kick it off.
Sounds great.
Yeah, sounds great. So as a quick intro, I'm co-founder and CEO of Sugar. We help companies sell on cloud marketplaces of AWS, Azure, and GCP, and Alibaba as well for, any of the APAC customers out there. But, been very fortunate to work with Vanta over the past year. And so really excited to dive into some of the best tips and tricks. And I think every company along its maturity curve has a different way or playbook of how they leverage cloud marketplaces. So definitely want to go through, each stage of what matters and what are some things that you should not be wasting time on.
Awesome. Jessica.
Yeah, nice to meet you guys or see you guys. I'm Jessica. I am a partner manager at Vanta, and I manage our relationship with AWS. I also manage our relationships with startup partners. So I've worked with Sarah in the past on that as well. And Vanta is an automated compliance platform that helps to automate compliance frameworks as well as streamline security reviews for companies of all sizes. So if you're familiar with SOC 2, HIPAA, ISO 27001, any of the dozens of frameworks that are out there, we help to automate that process for our customers. We are also, as Sarah mentioned, a craft portfolio company along with Sugar.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So back to basics. And I think that we will go deeper into some of this, but let's zoom all the way out. What is cloud marketplace and why should people care?
So cloud marketplaces, this is how I describe to my mom, actually. You kind of think about it as the app store for iPhones, where, you have iOS, the operating system, and all this ecosystem of developers that build on top of, iOS. They distribute it through the app store to iPhone users. It's the same exact kind of evolution is taking place in the B2B world where, every company in the past 2 decades, or so many of them, have been built on top of, one of the three clouds. And the hyperscalers, which is what we call, the cloud providers, have really opened up a channel for their customers to buy and sell from one another. And so there's so many different benefits, like it's supposed to lower the sales cycles by 40%, really shortening that procurement time. And you're able to access the cloud budget, the pre-committed spend that a company has committed to spending with AWS, for example. They can actually burn that down to purchase third-party software. And then I think kind of longer term, the vision is really to make it more like digital commerce, the way that you buy, toilet paper on retail marketplace. You should be able to buy Vanta for your SOC 2, compliance on AWS Marketplace.
Awesome. Cool. And Jessica, just on this, how did you or Vanta decide that cloud marketplace was a useful use of your time and energy?
Yeah. I think opportunity, we've seen it come up more and more, and it was starting to be brought up as, hey, do you guys sell on AWS Marketplace? Are you guys present there? Also, Vanta, runs on AWS, and we are very technically aligned with them in terms of integrations and other things, but we hadn't really leaned into that go-to-market side. And anyone that's partnered with AWS, they've heard about the three-pronged stool of co-building, co-marketing, and co-selling. And so I think there was that opportunity to really start to lean in and start to build up that co-sell and even co-market side of things. So I think it was, asks from customers, and then also just the opportunity to really lean in with one of the biggest giants in the space being AWS.
Awesome. And then with that, Jon, zoom into, what does it mean to be cloud committed? And what is the big picture around cloud commitment?
Totally. So I feel like you hear this all the time with like, I mean, I got to mention AI at some point in this conversation, but you hear oftentimes like compute is becoming the new currency. The way that AWS prices is on a pay-as-you-go model, right? So based on the amount of AWS services or resources that you consume, like compute, storage, et cetera, like EC2, for example, you pay AWS for that metered amount. Now, once you get to a certain amount, I think it's like $60,000 a month and spent with AWS, they'll actually reach out and say, hey, why don't you commit to spending, $2 million with us over 2 years, given, you're spending 60K a month with us, and we'll give you a 20% discount, but you have to commit to spending $1 million with us. The issue comes when, towards the end of your term, you realize we're not actually consuming as much as we thought, maybe because we didn't grow as fast as we thought, or we optimized, how we're architected, and so we're consuming less resources. And then I'm sure all these companies, all of AWS customers were reaching out to AWS saying, what the heck, like you made me commit to this amount, how do I, and it's a use it or lose it budget, how do I spend this? And so hence came AWS Marketplace, where you can actually use the remainder of the budget that you have not, consumed already to purchase third-party software tools. And so, the acronyms to keep in mind is like EDP, Enterprise Discount Program, or PPA. I mean, there's so many different acronyms. I'm sure anyone that's been in the cloud world, I think there's a dictionary of acronyms of AWS resources.
I love it.
I'm curious, just because I don't know, how common is it to have an EDP? Like, are most of the customers you're working with, do they have them, or are they usually a little bit bigger?
It's a really good question. The companies that sell the most through these cloud marketplaces are, think like think infrastructure platform layer software. So like cybersecurity companies, database, developer tools, because they're selling into the IT department. And so you also have to think about how expensive is it? So if you're thinking about a cybersecurity company where, I mean, there's millions of cybersecurity data flowing through your system, that's going to cost quite a bit, right, for you to manage all that. And so it really varies on one, where you lie on the tech stack. If you're just like a business application layer software tool, maybe you're not consuming that much. And so we see a lot of like, $20 million ARR plus companies not actually having an EDP because they're not consuming as much resources. But then we also see, PostgreSQL vector database companies that, might not have nearly that much ARR, but they are consuming so much in compute and storage that they will have an EDP, even like sub $1 million in ARR. And so it really varies on that stage.
Got it. Interesting. And I'm looking here at the audience and I'm curious, we are prepared to kind of start with like, is this worth it? Who owns it? Depending on your company size here, who should, be leading the charge. But I also want to be aware of like who's on here. And so feel free to like, if you know that you want to do cloud selling and you just want to get into the details, raise your hand, give me something to look at. Or if you're happy for us to kind of zoom out as well and figure out, the big picture around it, I'm happy to do that too. And also feel free to go in the chat, and I want to make this very interactive. But just wanted to, kind of get the baseline covered. So in the meantime, I will keep going with our track here, but pretty soon I'm hoping to see some faces and some questions to dig into what we've got here.
Actually, Sarah, we actually have someone from AWS in the call, Jeff Henriad.
Hello, there we go.
Maybe you can even answer the question about how important AWS Marketplace is and how many customers are on an EDP.
Man, so it's critical to what we do. I wish I could give you the specific numbers, but
I put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Marketplace, it's no secret that it's one of the continued areas of priority for AWS, and like we've just seen massive return. I think one thing that I would just call out, the reason I joined, one of the reasons I'm interested from a startup perspective, I work exclusively with startups at AWS, and we get a ton of interest from startups, and we hear consistently from startups that it's too hard, takes too long. Like if you're a startup, you need a list on the marketplace. Speed is all you care about, right? And so the fact that like Sugar can make this whole process so much faster and easier, that's why I'm here, because this resonates a lot with my day-to-day customers.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think Jeff, you bring up a really good point of like startups always asking about this, and you know, a lot of YC companies ask me, should I get listed on marketplace? I want to A/B test, and the answer I provide so often is, well, are your buyers asking for it? Because that's oftentimes the critical event. And Jessica, I know we kind of started talking in like February of last year, at which point, you know, you guys had already been listed, you know, your team did it yourself. And I recall like you were doing a lot of analysis around, is this the right channel for us to really invest our time into? Could you explain a little bit about how you assess the benefits or even some of the analysis that you did to figure out, you know, in the early days, hey, let's resource against this?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is crazy that we chatted over a year ago and now are Sugar customers and everything. But yeah, I think we always saw the opportunity with AWS in partnering with AWS and specifically AWS Marketplace. I think a lot of it was like, how far in do you lean in terms of co-sell and investing in a product like Sugar? So I think for us, we went a little bit different of a route, which was get listed ourselves, and we can go into what that process looked like, but kind of doing all of that on our own and getting into the programs on our own. So some common AWS programs you'll hear is like the Global Startup Program or ISV Accelerate. We went through that entire process to kind of check those boxes and make sure that we sort of had our footing and sort of understood the AWS kind of infrastructure before we really leaned in with Sugar. And so some of that analysis was just, you know, how often are customers bringing up AWS Marketplace? Are people coming across our marketplace listing? Is this helping us close deals? Is this helping us close bigger deals? There's all sorts of ways that we thought about it. And then as we kind of started to see that traction, we're really excited about co-selling with AWS, moving forward, starting to see it kind of that flywheel start to turn, to use an AWS term. That was really when we were like, all right, let's kind of pour the fuel on the fire and move forward. But I'd love to understand from you, Jon, like, is that a typical way that you see customers go about it? Or are you seeing most of your customers coming saying, hey, I got to get listed. Can you help me with that?
And I'll also say, Jon, I've been going with Tom Pinckney. I think we should call him at the end of this too, because he actually has leveraged Sugar too for one of his listings. And so I'd be curious to know like when he decided to leverage it, but I'll let you answer the question first.
Yeah, it's you know, I'll say this, which is you can get listed by yourself. Clearly Vanta did it, and I definitely want to hear more about that experience. A lot of companies actually decide to go about it themselves because, you know, AWS has very clear documentation, and you know, there's people like Jeff who can provide you with the right resources. The value that we provide, of course, is like time to market and all the things that happen after listing. But what I always say is, especially for early stage startups, it is not a channel where you can A/B test, you know, and there's not a lot of organic foot traffic where just because you get listed on marketplace, you know, it's kind of like turning on the faucet and it's going to help you hit all of your ARR goals. What it does is it does help speed up the procurement cycle. It helps you win deals sometimes where there's not a budget. And so when people reach out to us, oftentimes it is kind of in those two camps, right? It is either, hey, we want to, you know, activate this channel expecting all these lead gens to come. And then the camp of, I have this burning deal. I mean, I literally talked to a YC founder the other day who said, there's a university that will buy our AI tool if we can list on marketplace, and they will buy it today. And so we need to get on ASAP, and we don't have 2 months for us to do this because we're working on LLM stuff. And so it really varies on where you're at in the maturity cycle, but also, is there a critical event that is driving this urgency?
Interesting. And Tom, what are your thoughts on like, how did you decide when to go at it alone? And, you know, you've been in channel partnerships for a long time. how do you look at like the landscape here of channel partnerships overall as well?
Yeah, I guess the when I arrived at Sourcegraph, and Sourcegraph is a development tool software company. So we're selling predominantly to software development organizations. And originally, the product is a code search product, which enables you to search across all of your code hosts and all your code repositories. I arrived at Sourcegraph about 2 years ago, and one of the first things they said to me was, "Why don't we get listed in all three of the marketplaces?" And I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, that seems like a lot." I did not want to go do that myself. And frankly, I think there's yes, I probably agree with Jon that you can go and figure it out, but there are lots of hoops to jump through. And I think there are hoops to jump through, and AWS is quite good at answering questions on that, but there are hoops to jump through. There's also like the whole bookings package thing, and the bookings package looks a little bit different. And so as you go, work with finance, I was going to say fight with finance, but work with finance on what's a bookable transaction. It's quite useful to have a consultant to say, "Hey, here's best practice, and here's what people worry about, and here's what people don't worry about." And so that's like, just with a new process and not having a ton of resource, we thought it was a very good thing to outsource. And we did, before I knew about Sugar, we worked with a different vendor, and they were okay, and then found Sugar we built a generative AI coding solution called Cody, and got introduced to Jon and his team, and they listed that super, super quickly. In terms of reasons to do it, I mean, of course, salespeople have got lots of reasons why they don't win deals. And so there was sort of this constant stream of, "Hey, do we have marketplace?" And, "Oh, well, I don't know if that's what killed that deal, but if we had it, it would have helped." The good news on that is we had a handful of deals, like the deal that y'all just mentioned, that were ready to go. So when we turned the thing on, like within a month, we booked 3 or 4 deals. And actually, AWS was pretty fired up about that, because I think sometimes you turn on a marketplace deal, and you turn on a marketplace listing, and nothing comes through it. But we had several that came through quite quickly. I think to me, it's really ease of procurement. It just can flow a lot faster in these shops that like to buy via marketplace. In my experience, sometimes, Jon, that is, they want to go retire committed spend, and there's easier budget to justify there. I feel like in some orgs, though, it's just like, it's way easier. And internally, this is true. I've bought stuff through marketplaces, and it's like half the steps you have to go through internally at Sourcegraph. It's all the new vendor stuff. You're not getting around the contracts, but you're getting around a ton of stuff. And so it just makes it a lot easier to buy things via the marketplace. Now, we do have some cases where there's been budget locked up in a committed spend agreement and no budget elsewhere. And the salespeople want that to be free budget, like it's just this pile of money. In those cases, exactly, like, "Oh, free money. Who wants some $100 bills? This would be great. You can buy whatever you want." It's, of course, you think about it for a few minutes. That's what the salespeople want. You think about it for a few minutes. There's still a line of people trying to access that committed spend agreement. It just may be a lot easier to go justify that money than it is to go justify somewhere else. The other thing I think we see is that some orgs want to put money into marketplace, even if they're over committed spend, because they want to, when they do the next true up, if they're going to have a bigger committed spend agreement, that's going to justify a higher discount. And then something I've heard on and off is I think some procurement orgs, they like to go through marketplace just because it prevents shadow IT spend. So if it's a $5,000 spend, they hate it when somebody tries to expense that, and so they make it a little bit easier to go through marketplace so that somebody doesn't try and expense that stuff. Anyway, it's been, I think, a very good vehicle for us, particularly now that AWS has reduced rates. We used to pay a lot more in terms of discount rate, but we pay quite a bit less, which is it makes finance less concerned if something goes via marketplace.
Interesting. And with this, I heard the word procurement a couple of times, like, for whether it's Jon or Jessica or Tom or whoever, do you view this as procurement, or do you view it as lead gen, or is there a combination of both?
I can kick it off, which is, I think most people see it as procurement, or a lot of our customers, as Tom mentioned, it accelerates it. You get access to this budget that might have not existed before. Now, there is lead gen in the form of co-sell, which we can get into, where the perfect example I give is like, hey, you're doing a deal with Pepsi, and it was a great joint win with AWS, and then you're able to ask AWS, hey, what a great win on Pepsi. Can you now introduce us to Vanta, to Pepsi, like name your soda, right? And so that's how you generate a lot of incremental leads. But we can talk a little bit more about future trends, but I do think that there's a lot of initiatives going on with the cloud providers to drive organic foot traffic and to improve that searchability, functionalities and just like trends within these marketplaces. I'm curious to get your take though around, have you seen an uptick in incremental leads driven through these marketplaces, and how do you think about that process?
Yeah, we've definitely seen it, but I do think like most people, and as you said, it is a procurement method first. That's not to say that we don't see inbound leads, but I think that takes a lot of time. And so a lot of people have said, like, you're not just going to get listed on Marketplace and then all of a sudden see, all sorts of people reaching out wanting to purchase or all sorts of organic foot traffic. But as you start to see those wins and as you start to have wins with the AWS reps, they're getting to know your solution. They're getting to, you're winning with them. And so that also, then they're realizing, okay, this is a great partner to work with. I know that I have a customer that's looking for XYZ that I could maybe introduce Vanta to. And so I think it's not like an automatic off-on switch where all of a sudden you've got leads pouring in. But I think as you invest in that partnership and if you lean into the procurement, it kind of starts to like turn that flow of those inbound leads as well. And we're working with you and with, our internal team and with our AWS team on really seeing how we can start to, see more of that revenue and see those inbounds, because it's definitely something you hear about and there are lots of companies that see it.
Totally. And I think there's a big distinction between what we call like private offers, which are custom offers, more like sales-led, customized proposals basically being sent through these marketplaces, and public offers that are more designed for a PLG motion. And so, one of our differentiation has been around metering, and, we're an API first company. And so what we've been seeing is like a lot of usage-based pricing companies that do have a PLG motion is starting to take off. And a lot of that reason is because they make marketplace front and center on their website. So, even though there's no organic foot traffic on marketplace, they actually show on the pricing page of their website where there is, traffic that's driven by SEO and all these different, things that they do to drive inbound traffic. They actually say, subscribe on AWS Marketplace, and here's how easy it is to do so. And now some of the more advanced, kind of functionalities that people do to drive this transactions there is they'll actually provide free credits through AWS Marketplace. So it is like, vector database companies, for example, that give $200 in free, company credits just to incentivize people to procure through this channel. And then once they've consumed those free credits, then it's metered usage that's built through Marketplace. And so we've seen that take off quite a bit. And then not to, kind of go too much into detail, but there's also differences in SaaS listings versus container listings. So like, is it hosted in your own cloud versus is it hosted in a customer's cloud, like in the customer's VPC? We've actually started to see containers take off quite a bit as well, where especially as companies are really cagey about their data leaving their environment, a lot of container listings have started to take off as people, individual engineers want to leverage some vector database, product, and they just, download the container, and that's been pretty good around driving some of those public offers as well.
Awesome. Anyone else here on the screen have anything to add of when they've been set up on marketplaces, what they thought really added fuel to fire? Or Jeff, anything that you've seen, given that you're at AWS, that you think really helps once you're on that marketplace?
I can jump in. Jessica talked about some of the things that you do to sort of check the boxes as you get engaged with AWS. I think marketplace is a pretty critical one. We've seen a couple of account introductions as we get to know one account and say, who else is in your book? I think to the Pepsi example. I think an even better example is, if you go do an age registration and you say the AWS rep, can you help? They always ask you on marketplace, and they take you far more seriously if you are on marketplace. And oftentimes where we've seen, if it's a big account and we're in one division, if you're in marketplace and you drive a marketplace transaction for one division, then they're going to tell you, they'll open up the whole org chart, and the AWS team is going to know that org chart quite well and say, let's go see so-and-so or call this person, and this is their boss's name, and this is what they care about. And so I think marketplace is it's kind of a skeleton key to unlock that stuff in some of these bigger accounts. And if you don't have marketplace, they're probably just not going to answer your phone call. But if they do, they're not going to be nearly as open on that engagement.
Yeah, that was actually something I was going to add to, like, both on the AWS side and with your customers, is that being listed just kind of adds, one, that brand awareness, and two, the credibility, right? Like, there is a whole process you have to go through in order to get listed on AWS Marketplace. And so I think it legitimizes, like, how you're seen within AWS as a partner if you went through that process. Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I feel like it does. And then also with customers too, hey, they're chatting with Vanta, they look us up. Oh, look, Vanta's on AWS Marketplace. Whether they want to buy through AWS Marketplace or not, it's just another level of, like, that credibility that they can see. Cool, they went through that process, they're listed. Maybe they are an AWS customer and they say, now I want to ask my AWS rep if they know about them. It just kind of adds another level that I think is helpful as well.
Especially in the startup ecosystem, as like you're going up market, people are nervous to take a chance on startups sometimes. And it's like, nope, they're legit. They're in the marketplace. That's maybe another step. And I know, Jon, you and I both used to work at Salesforce, and they recently had an announcement. Like, how are you thinking about, like, marketplaces overall? So to zoom out from just AWS, what are your thoughts, both of you or anyone?
It's super exciting. You always hear the term co-sell at Salesforce. And you always, there's like ISV app exchange, where in the early days, I had no idea what it was. And then you look at like the TAM numbers in any analysis, and it's like in the trillions, like, what the heck is this space? And you realize there's like this ecosystem of companies that build towards these gaps within Salesforce's, suite of tools. And I think the main difference is that Salesforce's marketplace didn't have that procurement engine. It was really a marketing catalog for people to understand, okay, this tool solves for this gap. And I think the difference also is, like, Salesforce is on the business application layer, right? Kind of a platform, but the cloud sits even further down the tech stack. And so there's even a bigger market of companies that are built on top of the cloud. And so that's super exciting. Now, that definitive agreement that they signed, like, that's super exciting, because I think in the past, it really was those companies that used to sell to IT buyers that were leveraging marketplace. And I think in the past 2-3 years, you've seen more and more companies that sell into sales and marketing departments that have really been leveraging this channel. And so some of our customers in the business application layer, like, in the early days, they had no idea how to even access this budget or how to even have that conversation. And it's been pretty amazing to see them, like, they're spiffing it, they're doing comp neutral, for their sellers to sell it. And we're seeing some of them, like, really take off and access this whole new budget that they never had access to before, right? So super exciting.
That's awesome. And so if you were to say, okay, let's say that everyone, whether on here or listening to the recording, it's like, yes, we should do marketplace. Who is supposed to own this within a company? And so, like, if you're a founder, how do you think about that? If you are, obviously Vanta's a bigger company with more resources, like, how do you spread the ownership, and where should it live?
I can start, or Jon, do you want to start? Either way.
No, please, Jessica. I don't know how to answer this question.
Founder doing this on their own, and then we're going to have a team owning it. And so I think it's important because, there's some cross-selling here too.
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on size of company, as you alluded to. And so I can only speak from my experience, but What I do know is AWS really does like to have that like single point of contact, and then that person is kind of project managing and pushing out all of the different to-dos. Because to get listed on Marketplace, there is, a go-to-market component, there's the enablement component, there's also a technical component. And so it's very few and far between that one person is going to be able to handle all of that. But what I do think is having one person project manage not only getting listed on Marketplace, but the partnership as a whole is really, really helpful. And then as it grows, you can, expand that out to loop in marketing and to loop in your technical resources and things. But that was how we did it. I managed the project and then was kind of like, hey, we need help on this thing. We need language for this. And I can't speak for AWS, but I think that's probably how they see most people doing it, is kind of that single point of contact, and then they're project managing it out. Jon, is that what you see most of the time?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a village, and it kind of ends up becoming, at some places where maybe they're not as organized, it becomes like that Spider-Man meme where they're just pointing at one another, like, no, it's your responsibility. At the end of the day, it's a revenue generating channel. And so oftentimes a founder is involved. Oftentimes it's like CRO, head of sales, who want to activate this channel because it's going to speed up procurement, right? But then as they start to scale up and as they start to engage in co-sell, it becomes like a head of partnership, head of BD, because they're driving, incremental revenue or a net new partnership, like strategic partnership with the cloud providers. But then what we see is like the more scale and repeatability that a company achieves, it becomes a revenue operations problem, because then you get into deals of how are things getting piped into, an ERP solution? How's the quote to cash process? Because we have 10 different tools that we're using for that. How does it integrate with CPQ? And so the Salesforce admin always gets involved, deal desks. I actually see Jason Lee, who's part of the revenue operations team at Snowflake, on the call as well. I don't know if Jason, if you're there, but he's really the person who's driving a lot of this initiatives at Snowflake as well. And so it really varies depending on the maturity of a given company. Maybe Jason, you can speak a little bit to how you ended up holding the responsibilities.
Yeah. Hey everyone, name's Jason. I've been with Snowflake for about 2.5 years. I'm in the sales strategy and biz ops team. And unofficially, I'm one of the go-to people for cloud marketplaces. And as Jon said, and totally resonates, it does take a village, right? Because it really ends up touching the entire org. And I think marketplaces sit at this unique point where some people would say it's a channel, other people will say it's not, right? So it's sort of in between. So what we've experienced internally is everyone has a voice, but then at the same time, you do need that executive sponsor to push things forward, right? But really it touches, all the teams from IT, and it could touch engineering, finance, collections, of course, partnerships, sales, RevOps. And then if you think about listing across the 3 marketplaces, then you've just, multiplied your kind of problem and kind of nuances, right? So there's always something new. The marketplaces continue to roll out new functionality, new features. And so it definitely keeps, I'd say, the job exciting.
And for all of you who have who have been on marketplaces, like, what are the lessons learned? Where did you screw up that you can help other people not do that? Pitfalls to avoid, time wasted, anything that you wish someone had told you? And maybe with that, Jon, like, what companies should not be on a marketplace, or Jeff?
Sure.
It's I think companies that I clearly I'm a little bit biased, but I think everyone should be on marketplace. But the folks that aren't are really those ones that haven't found product market fit, because so many times they want to get on marketplace trying to find their first 10 customers, and they see it as a channel, and they waste all this time like getting listed and are surprised that they don't get any customers out of it. Part of the thing to get the flywheel going is you need customers who, you can get a few quick wins on marketplace so that you can go to AWS and say, hey, here's some joint use cases, here's some wins. How do we replicate the success, which kickstarts the flywheel motion? But people that go into it expecting, incremental leads, expecting to find net new customers to drive their first like 20 customers, probably not the best fit unless you have a kind of that critical urgent event. What would you say, Jessica?
Yeah, I think one of the things for us, and maybe it more of like a lesson learned than anything, was just enabling internally earlier and like really pushing it. I think it like the expectation of like, oh, we're listed on Marketplace and now AWS is going to know about it and internally Vanta is going to know about it. That's just not necessarily the case. And so I think really understanding like as an organization why you did it and making that very clear both to AWS and the AWS reps you're talking to, also your AWS partner team, and then really adding that enablement internally of like, why would a customer want to purchase through Marketplace? What does this mean? Thinking about the process for how to do it. Investing in a tool like Sugar to help you do that and kind of understand those best practices. I think, like Jon said, a lot of people that are getting listed on marketplaces to like close one deal or, you know, potentially close a couple. But if you really start to think about it and lay that infrastructure earlier, I think that that's a lesson. And that enablement internally has been a big one for us. Once our sales reps and our go-to-market org really like understood the partnership with AWS, that's when we started to see a lot of success, and it's been exciting.
Wait, I would actually take a controversial, or not controversial, but like a little bit, because I do think that driving that internal alignment is super important, right? And I mean, you've been amazing at that and driving that momentum and excitement at Vanta. And I think you have buy-in at every level of the leadership. But on the operations and the business system side, I do think that some companies like come to us wanting all this automation. And oftentimes it's like the IT team or like the RevOps team that are like, we need to do this, that, this automation, pipe it into NetSuite. And there's part of me that just wants to say like, we can help you do all that, but why don't you get a few quick wins first? You know, kind of take the similar to the journey that you made, Jessica, of, or you know, not mistake, this path that you guys took of, hey, let's get a few quick wins and see if this is the right channel for us, and then invest in the automation once we have a good feeling of what that process is like before we overinvest in the automation.
Yeah, and I'm so happy that that's the path that we took. I think also coming to Sugar with an understanding of like, hey, this is the process that we have. We've seen quite a few wins with it. How can you help us make that even better? Was a really great experience for us. That's not what every customer is going to experience, but I do think for us, you know, coming with a process that was already in place and then having Sugar kind of enhance that was the right path for us. I think just, you know, we've been, as I mentioned in the beginning, I've been speaking with Jon for almost a year and a half now, and we've been customers of Sugar for quite a while now, and it's been great. I think leaning into the cloud marketplaces is, I think it's where a lot of things are going. And so we're really excited to be on the journey with Sugar and on the journey with AWS. And also just happy to answer any questions that anyone has from the customer perspective, either from the AWS side or from Sugar as well. Any other questions?
All right then.
No? All right. Well, good. Well, I'm glad that we actually had some people here who could speak to being a customer as well, whether AWS or Sugar. So thank you all very much. Jon and Jessica, fun to work with you on this.
Absolutely.
Tom, I'll see you tomorrow. And nice to see everyone. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.